Constantly changing wage and hour laws make it nearly impossible for California businesses to remain compliant. So, not surprisingly, no other state in the country has more labor lawsuits and employment violations than California. With no caps on damages, California employers find themselves at risk to paying significant monetary judgments. Every year, California employers in violation of wage and hour laws pay hundreds of millions of dollars in civil restitution in addition to state penalties and attorney's fees. Wage and hour laws divide employees into two categories, exempt and non-exempt. California wage and hour laws only apply to non-exempt employees. The following key distinctions differentiate exempt and non-exempt employees. Exempt, not eligible for overtime. Not provided required rest and meal breaks. Paid twice the minimum hourly wage based on a 40-hour work week. Can be required to work more than 40 hours weekly without overtime pay. 50% or more of their work is executive, administrative, or professional. Regularly employs independent judgment on the job. Manages a business or a department. Regularly directs 2 or more full-time employees. Has the authority to hire and fire or make recommendations. Decides promotions and wage changes. Examples of exempt employees include executives, administrative, and licensed professionals like doctors, outside salespeople, and computer professionals. Non-exempt. Do not meet the aforementioned requirements for exempt status. Qualified for overtime, rest, and meal breaks. Subject to California's minimum wage laws. Paid on a wage and hourly basis as their responsibilities do not qualify for overtime exemption. It is important to note that exemption status can change if job duties change. As of 2024, the California minimum wage for employers with 26 or more employees is $17 and will increase to $18 for years 2025 and 2026. For employers with 25 employees or less, it's $16, increasing $1 per year through 2026 when it reaches $18. Fast food employees earn $20 an hour in restaurant chains with more than 60 establishments. Healthcare employees' minimum wage is $18 to $23 per hour depending on the facility. For example, healthcare employees in facilities with over 10,000 full-time employees, FTEs, or county-operated facilities with over 5,000 FTEs earn $23 hourly. That wage increases $1 a year, reaching $25 in 2026. Overtime is paid to non-exempt employees over 18 or 16 if legally allowed under these circumstances. After 8 hours worked per day, the employee is paid time and a half. After 40 hours worked per week, the employee is paid time and a half. Time and a half is paid for the first 8 hours on the 7th consecutive day worked. Double time pay for work beyond 12 hours. Double time pay for work on the 7th consecutive day beyond 8 hours. Employers are not required to provide paid or unpaid vacation. However, if an employer does provide paid vacation, unused vacation time counts as wages. Discretionary bonuses like an annual holiday bonus cannot be used to satisfy overtime requirements or any portion of the salary requirement because they are not measured by production or hours worked. Incentive pay is a non-discretionary bonus based on performance above hourly wages and salary. If paid to a non-exempt employee, it is calculated as overtime as it's part of the employee's standard rate of pay. For example, an employee's commissions received satisfy overtime requirements when they equal or exceed earnings employees would have received by the state's overtime requirements. Whether commissions are the employee's sole source of compensation or in addition to their salary or standard pay rate, they must equal or exceed minimum wage. Also, if an employee was on track to earn wages based on expected commissions when they were terminated, the employer must compensate the portion earned. Rest and meal breaks must be provided to employees with the following standards: 30-minute meal break for more than 5 hours per day. Can be mutually waived if daily total isn't more than 6. Second 30-minute meal break for more than 10 hours per day. Can be mutually waived if daily total is less than 12 hours and first meal period was not waived. 10-minute rest periods for any 4-hour work period. Must be counted as time worked and paid time. Violations per workday require 1 additional hour of pay to employees' check at employees' regular rate. Healthcare employees working more than 8 hours in a day may waive the right to one of the 2 meal periods in a written notice. Collective bargaining agreements create exemption from California's meal period provisions for employees like construction workers, security officers, and gas and electric company workers. Holidays are treated as normal workdays, and no extra pay is required for work done on these days. Employers are required to reimburse employees for all necessary expenditures in direct consequence of performing job duties. Employers with voluntary work-from-home agreements must consider how to reimburse workers. Time pay is required when employees arrive to work expecting a certain number of hours, but due to scheduling or lack of notice don't work their full schedule. Employees that work less than half of their scheduled time must be paid for half of the scheduled time. Time pay cannot be less than 2 hours nor more than 4 hours. Time pay is made only when an employer ends the shift before half is completed. For any further work, the employee is paid their standard rate for the time worked. Piecework is work paid for a set rate per unit for completing goods or a task. It must equal or exceed the state's minimum wage for all hours worked. Severance pay is not mandated. Employers that choose to pay severance must do so under the terms of their current policy or employment contract. There is not a reduced minimum wage rate for tipped employees in California. Since tips are not provided by the employer, they cannot be used to satisfy overtime requirements. However, mandatory service charges based on an agreement are not voluntary and thus can be included in the regular hourly pay rate for overtime. A split shift is when an employee's work schedule is interrupted by a non-paid, non-working period of more than 60 minutes. When this occurs, the employee is entitled to 1 additional hour of pay at no less than the minimum wage rate. This is not required if the employee's payday exceeds minimum wage. On-call, also known as callback or standby time, is compensable when an employee is subject to the employer's control at the worksite. Employees must be paid their standard hourly rate and overtime if subject to the following restrictions: excessive geographic restrictions on the employee's movements. Frequency of calls are unreasonably restrictive. Fixed time limit for response is unreasonably restrictive. Ease for the on-call employee to trade on-call responsibilities with another employee. Whether the employee participates in personal activities during the on-call periods can mitigate the time worked. California employees may request to work longer hours on another day to make up the missed time without incurring overtime provided they have written approval. These requests may not be encouraged. If allowed, the time must be made up in the same work week. Make-up time must not exceed 40 hours in a week or 11 hours in a day. Travel time must be paid if non-exempt employees are required to travel for work activities during work hours. This includes any mode of transportation, such as a plane or in the company car or in their car, except for commuting. They must be paid at least minimum wage, and these hours must be counted when calculating overtime. Non-exempt employees are paid 67 cents on each business mile driven in addition to minimum wage. Employers need to check annually for changes. This standard is applied to electric and hybrid vehicles as well as gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles. The employee and employer may instead decide upon a fixed amount known as the lump sum method that covers all incurred expenses. Sick leave pay of 40 hours, 5 days, is required to be paid per 12-month period for full-time employees. Employees earn this compensation at a rate of a single hour for every 30 hours worked. Newly hired employees may begin using accrued time on their 90th day. Employees are allowed to accrue 24 hours of sick leave by the 120th day of their employment and 40 hours of sick leave by the 200th day of their employment. In a separate option, employers can provide paid sick leave up front, giving employees 40 hours or 5 days of leave at the beginning of employment and each 12 months thereafter. Sick leave pay carries over to the next year, but employers can put a cap on the total amount of accrued sick leave at 80 hours or 10 days. California employees who have suffered a reproductive loss are entitled to 5 days leave within 3 months of the loss. The rights include miscarriage, failed adoptions, failed surrogacy, stillbirth, or an unsuccessful assisted reproduction. Employers do not have to pay employees for time used for reproductive loss leave, but employees may use sick leave, vacation, or PTO for compensation during leave. Employers with 5 or more employees are required to provide bereavement leave to employees who have worked for the employer for at least 30 days. The leave is for 5 days and can be unpaid. The person who passed away must be the spouse, child, sibling, grandparent, grandchild, or parent-in-law of the employee. The ABC test used by the California Supreme Court determines independent worker status when they are free from control and direction, perform work outside the usual course of business, and are independently established in that trade. Labeling a worker as an independent contractor, even with a written agreement, will not avoid the labor laws on overtime pay, and it can result in misclassification, fines, or lawsuits. For example, California Assembly Bill No. 5 prevents misclassification of on-demand workers like Uber drivers. This entitles them to unemployment insurance, minimum wage, and other employee benefits. The California Labor Code determines wage standards for how employees' wages are calculated, determinations of hours worked, and rules on deductions. For example, deductions and garnishments on wages must be either authorized by the employee in writing or permitted by law. Wage orders are the rules for employers established by California's Industrial Welfare Commission, IWC. They pertain to minimum wages, working conditions, overtime breaks, and more. California employers must use both the Labor Code and wage orders to be compliant. Wages earned the 1st through the 15th must be paid no later than the 26th day of the month the employee worked. Wages earned the 16th through the final day of the month must be paid by the 10th day of the following month. Other payroll periods require payment within 7 calendar days from the end of the payroll period in which wages were earned. Regardless of payment form, California is one of the few states that require a detachable part of the check or a separate writing to show required information. Terminated employees must be paid all unpaid wages at termination, including unused vacation or other paid time off. Employees who provide 72 hours notice must also receive all unpaid wages on the last day of work. If 72 hours notice isn't provided, the employer must provide the check to the employee within 72 hours of the resignation. When businesses may have to downsize, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act requires employers to provide employees 60-day notice. Federal and state law interrelate at times regarding wage and hour laws, such as the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, the California Labor Code, wage orders created by California's Industrial Welfare Commission, IWC. The passage of Assembly Bill 102 reactivated and funded the IWC to regulate wages, hours, and working conditions in California. Wage orders are still enforced by the California Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, DLSE. With more employees working from home, there are more claims for unpaid wages and failure to pay overtime. Organizations should give written notice that non-exempt employees properly document work hours, rest, and meal breaks. Employees should work only when scheduled and get prior approval for overtime. Newly enacted standards presume most workers to be covered by the workers' comp system. Compensate employees for cell phone, Wi-Fi, and office supply expenses. Employers may set a monthly flat stipend. Post notice of paydays and the time and location of payment. The notice must be located where employees frequently congregate, such as a break room. For employees working from home, California law allows required notices to be sent via email, but employers must still physically display posters in the workplace. Ensure that wages and overtime pay reflect hazard pay increases for essential workers. Where applicable, have both parties sign a commission compensation agreement that specifies how commissions are to be paid. Make payroll records available for inspection for at least 3 years at the place of employment or location within California. Upon hire, employers must provide the extensive list of documents required under the California Wage Theft Protection Act. If there are any additions or changes to these documents required under the California Wage Theft Protection Act, employers must notify non-exempt employees in writing. Create and consistently update a well-crafted employee handbook to reflect and adhere to ever-changing California labor laws. Wage and hour infractions can be costly. In 2024, a major U.S. home improvement chain paid a $72.5 million settlement for various wage and hour violations. Failure to pay an employee's wages includes a $100 penalty for the first violation and for each failure to pay each employee. Consequent violations or any willful violations are $200 per employee plus 25% of the amount unlawfully withheld. Executives can be subject to individual liability if it's found they attempted to circumvent the law. Intentional violations may not be covered by liability insurance. Misclassifying employees and subsequently paying wages incorrectly can lead to class action suits for unpaid wages, overtime, interest, damages, lawyer, and court costs. Employers can also face state civil penalties and an FLSA penalty of up to $10,000. California businesses can create an environment where employees feel valued, are paid timely, accurately, and in accordance with the law. Every employee wants to know the work they do matters and is compensated as agreed. Taking the time to execute a plan to follow wage and hour laws will save the organization time and money and keep employees working for the companies they love in the great state of California.